Since the launching of the war in the Middle East, we've brought you the voices of Gazans under a brutal retaliatory bombardment, Israeli bombs seeking Hamas militants, instead finding Palestinian children. We've brought you the voices of Israelis enraged at Hamas militants for the murders and kidnapping on October 7th. Others angry at Prime Minister Netanyahu for his lack of security, his callous plan to manage Gaza by funneling money to Hamas to pit them against Palestinian leaders in the West Bank. What we haven't heard are views of Gazans in Gaza, of their leadership, Hamas. Here's one man. He says in Arabic there are many Gazans who don't back this war. We added a voiceover as he continued.
لما أنت تبدأ تتنقل وبعد ما ينتهي هذه الأحداث وتشوف الدمار الفعلي اللي صار على أرض الواقع.
When you're able to go around and all of this is over and they see the destruction, then you're going to hear people say, who gave them, Hamas, the right to start a war without the collective decision of the Palestinian people?
According to our next guest, there's a lot of opposition to Hamas that can't be expressed because it's too dangerous. Joseph Braude is director of the Center for Peace Communications, a nonprofit whose chair is former Ambassador Dennis Ross, and whose staff consists of scholars from the Middle East aiming to amplify voices for peace. First, they began safely and anonymously recording Gazans against Hamas in a project called Whispered in Gaza. Their new project, in partnership with the Free Press, is Voices from Gaza, all recorded after the October 7th attack and weeks of the bombing campaign. We'll have links at herenow.org as Joseph Braude joins us. Welcome.
Hi, Robin.
And Joseph, we should say you're Iraqi-American. We spoke in 2003 during the Iraq-U.S. war. Many of your staff, as we said, are from the Mideast. Why, first of all, did you record these Gazans? How did you find them and how did you do it?
We recorded them because they wanted to make their voices heard. In 2019, about 1,000 young men and women in Gaza braved gunfire and prison to protest Hamas rule. And they did it again in July of this year. But the world didn't pay a lot of attention. And these efforts are being waged on an ongoing basis on a grassroots level in Gaza to reach the outside world. And it's our mandate to give a platform to such voices.
Well, the early Whispered in Gaza recordings are beautifully made into graphic videos. The newest recordings that you've done post-October 7th aren't yet made into graphics. They're a voice wave. The voices have been somewhat distorted to protect people. We'll hear them first in Arabic, and then we have colleagues reading the transcription. Here is a Gazan in Gaza. She's asked for her reaction to the October 7th attacks. I think she is referring, when she does, to the Israeli peace activist Vivian Silver, who was killed. Let's listen.
When I saw what happened, I got very angry. There was an Israeli peace activist who defends our right more than their own, and she was kidnapped barbarically. If I saw a hostage or knew where they were, I'd bring them home. We want to live in peace. We want to see a white dove, not blood. My older brother was murdered by Hamas in front of our eyes. 54 gunshots, his blood spilling in front of his children. My mother prays God relieves us of Hamas. God take vengeance on Hamas. Ending Hamas is the demand of young and old alike in Gaza.
Joseph, that is stunning. She would bring the hostages home if she could. Look, I'm going to ask what maybe some of our listeners are thinking. How do we know that this voice isn't maybe cherry-picked by your group that feels so strongly about peace? How do we know what she represents?
There's a litter of survey data by Palestinians and by outsiders going back years that points to a very large trend of Gazan opposition to Hamas right on the eve of this war. 70% of Gazans said that they were in favor of Hamas disarming and being replaced by the Palestinian Authority, which was the option that was put in front of them in the poll. 73% said they believed Hamas institutions are corrupt. And that's in a poll in which 63% said they didn't feel they could express themselves freely. And of course, the anti-Hamas demonstrations, where a very large number of people turned out, obviously reflect the views of a much larger number who simply don't have quite as much courage as the demonstrators.
Yeah. Well, here's another man. He's in the Jabalia refugee camp. He speaks about seeing 400 people die around him when the bombs fall. But when he's asked by someone in your organization about whether Hamas is using Palestinians as human shields, he says a Hamas member went to hide with his family. They were then bombed. Then he said this.
More carnage? Why? Because that piece of filth who went to hang with his family in the middle of a war. So the people of that area, including my family, here's what we did. To keep Hamas from walking in our narrow streets, we blocked the streets off with sheet metal so no one could get in at night. Talking amongst ourselves, we know the source of the catastrophe, and it's Hamas who makes the problems. They're the ones who hide among us. It is clear to everyone, though it still doesn't justify killing civilians.
And Joseph, here I want to note, he's saying, yeah, Hamas militants are hiding among the families. He is blaming them for why civilians are being bombed, but he makes clear it doesn't justify Israel killing civilians. We should say these aren't Palestinians who are supporting Israel or Netanyahu.
Certainly, and there are also majorities that express support for resistance in the abstract. But when asked about the Hamas brand of resistance, that's where they show their opposition, because they're angry that Hamas starts wars it can't win and hides in bunkers while civilians suffer the casualties. They also fault Hamas for its corruption, which is a betrayal, in their view, of Palestinian nationalism.
But we should note that, on the other hand, there are people that you spoke with who are hoping for some relationship with Israel. They talk about Palestinian workers being able to cross to work in Israel. There are people hoping for a solution.
There has always been a cadre of what I would say is at least 15 to 20% of the population that harbors a deep belief in the principle of coexistence. And it's remarkable when you think about it, given the brainwashing on a grand scale that Hamas has sought to impose on the population. But in addition to that group, there is a substantially larger number that is simply pragmatic, Robin, that will happily participate in a post-Hamas administration if it is about reconstruction and delivering benefit and value to the population, giving people the opportunity to live a more decent life.
Yeah. Here's another woman responding to questions about what she thinks about the Western protests against Israel.
ولكن إذا كان المتظاهرون مهتمين بمعاناة الشعب الفلسطيني لماذا لم نراهم يتظاهرون ضد حماس؟
If the protesters are concerned with Palestinian suffering, why aren't they protesting Hamas? Hamas destroyed the Palestinian people's dreams and aspirations and future and repeatedly quashed Gazan youth protests demanding an end to Hamas rule in Gaza, shooting, jailing, killing. The pro-Hamas protests in the West aim to prolong Hamas rule through a deal with Israel. That's unacceptable, as it would make Hamas victorious. Foreign people felt sad for us and went out to protest, but if they truly understood what was happening here, they would have stayed home.
Joseph Browdy, what do we do with these voices you've gathered? People have been calling for a ceasefire. Here's a woman, a Palestinian, saying, not if it will make Hamas victorious. What are we supposed to do with this?
Well, it's obviously a very difficult question, Robin, but what these people are saying is in no way in defense of the civilian carnage in Gaza, but rather to say that if this war ends with Hamas in place, what is the point of all of this? Why are these people dying if not to remove Hamas from power? So the concern is that a ceasefire that leaves Hamas in place will only guarantee more bloodshed and more fighting in the not-too-distant future. And there's actually a man who put it this way. He said that if there's a ceasefire, which is basically, as he defines it, a deal cut between Israel and Hamas, then in the next 2 years, before Hamas repeats the same scenario, we're all going to go backwards 50 years. But I need 2 good years just to get back on my feet.
Joseph Browdy, director of the nonprofit Center for Peace Communications. Again, we'll link you at herenow.org, bringing us the voices of Gazans in Gaza objecting to their leadership, Hamas. Joseph, thank you so much.
Thank you, Robin.